Welcome back. I've got Jen Swanson on. Jen, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much, Michael.
Thank you so much. And as I said in the pre-show, I had to reschedule this one many times. So I'm really, really thankful that you hung in there and you're like, okay, yeah, we could do it today. And I'm like thrilled. It's like, oh yes, finally we get to talk to Jen because I've been looking forward to this one for a while because you do
Thanks so
some
much.
really, really amazing work. So why don't you share a little bit about you and then we'll jump into our conversation.
Awesome. Sure. Well, I lead a small boutique firm. We're headquartered in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but we serve clients all over the country. The firm is called Tuck Point Advisory Group, and we are a very niche firm. And I love having a niche firm. We could talk about that, about why I think niche is great. But the work that we do is that we help companies transform and strengthen their operating model, which is I'm going to guess that your next question is, ask me, Michael. What's your next question?
Well, let me think about it. What in the world is an operating model? Now, spoiler alert, I already know, but I'm going to pretend that I don't. So,
Right, we
yeah.
kind of set this
Well,
one up, didn't we?
yeah, exactly. This was on a tee, and I had the right club, and I hit it, and it actually went straight for the first time in history. So,
I
um,
really appreciate that. I
yeah,
really
so
appreciate that. We're
yeah,
like
so
Abbott and Costello already, aren't we?
yeah. This
Yeah.
is good. Yeah, so
All
yeah,
right. Well,
share what it is.
sure. An operating model really it's all about how work gets done inside of a company, right? So it's how work is organized, how it's prioritized. It's even how work gets funded, how teams are structured. And for a lot of companies, especially large companies, that can be really chaotic. I grew up inside of large organizations. I've worked in large universities, large corporations, and personally, I've had the experience of, sort of being the person who came in and was like, well, how do you get money for your projects, or how do you get things approved? And it was always like, well, you have to know a guy, or you have to be like, you have to go, you got to get your project approved by Beth. Beth doesn't have like a big title, but Beth knows everybody. Beth has worked in you know, has had every job in the company. And if Beth doesn't like your project, it's never going to get off the ground, right? Like it's all the unspoken rules in your company and things like that. Most companies have operating models or have ways of working that are like full of these, like, sort of opaque, baroque, unspoken rules and regulations, and like hidden messages. And you have somebody new come into the company, and then they come in with their shiny pencils and brand new notebooks, and they're all excited and everything, and they're like, great, I'm so excited to do my job. And then they realize that there's like a whole set of unwritten rules that they're supposed to learn. That's a signal of a not very healthy operating model. What we do is help companies really think about and be intentional about and articulate and sort of organize their operating models and be really thoughtful about them and scale them, in a really intentional way. That's what my company does. So,
It's as I said in the pre-show. Spoiler, alert, we kind of knew, but I said this in the
yeah.
pre-show notes. I said I would say at least half, if not more, of the organizations out there um, don't know about operating models. And as you said, most or every organization has them. It's just kind of bubble
Right.
gum and duct tape.
Right.
And
Right.
you gave a great example. It's like, okay, if Beth doesn't like it, we're not doing it. And what that does is that limits the organization on any potential new endeavors, because if Beth has been there all this time, statistically speaking, and Beth could be an anomaly here, but
Right.
we're just picking on the fictional character named Beth. So if you're a listener
Right.
and your name is Beth, we're not
There's no
talking ab-
no
we're
shade.
we're not talking you. We could have said Steve or Karen or anything like that, but
Right.
Beth is what we landed on early in the
Right.
alphabet, so it worked. But if Beth hasn't been looking outward and seeing what the market is doing, she's going to be using a playbook that she has slowly built
Mhm.
for herself over the last however many years she's been at the organization.
Mhm.
And we see the stats all the time. There's the
Mhm.
Fortune 500 stat that I share all the time that, it's 52% of the Fortune 500 companies from the year 2000 are gone now.
Mhm.
They're not here. And then
Yes.
And then 52%, ironic, it's the same percentage of online businesses that were launched in 2020 are gone. And
Mhm.
every one of these organizations, I would be willing to bet, didn't have a good grasp on what their operating model and system
Yeah,
was. And they had too many Beths in the
yeah,
organization and not
yep.
enough new people with the shiny pen going, would you be open to looking at this? Because, and I see this all the time, because I work with HR people a lot, and they say, yeah, we're going to bring this person. They've got all these skills that we're lacking, but then they get in the door and they're like, oh, those skills, no, can we put them in this box over here? We're just going to put them over here
Sure,
on the side.
sure.
And then
Yes,
on garbage day,
sure.
for some reason, that box gets tossed in the
Mhm.
bin, and they're like, we hired this person to do all of these great things, but we won't let them.
But we
And
won't
that
let them. Sure.
and
Yeah,
that's why you see, the disengagement numbers that we
sure.
see.
Yep. Yeah, and it's funny, one of the things too that happens, you mentioned that stat about the number of companies that were in business in 2020 or in 2000 that are no longer in business now, right? One of the things that we see also, because we have one of our passions as a company is we really love working with legacy companies, right? So companies that have been around for 75 years, 100 years. I have a client right now that has been around for 150 years, right? So talk about having a little bit of inertia of it's always been done that way, kind of kind of a thing. um, One of the things that we talk a lot about with our clients is this idea of what got you here is not what's going to get you to the next level or to help you survive in what comes next. And I think clients innately know that, right? Especially companies that have been around for that long because they have seen some stuff, right? These are companies that have survived through world wars. They have survived through depressions and recessions and unbelievable social upheaval, right? So, we're not walking in and telling them something that they don't already know. But the kind of transformation that is happening all around them right now is pretty significant, right? When we think about, um, the pace of technical change is just, I mean, to say it's a hockey stick is doesn't even do it justice, right? The steepness of that curve, right? For those that can't see, I'm a big hand talker, right? So that pace is just nowhere going nowhere but up and fast. Um, there's social change happening all around us, but when you think about even just thinking about what consumers are going through, right? So if you're in a B2C business, and frankly, even if you're in a B2B business, guess what? There's human beings that are sitting in the businesses that are consuming your product, right? So this is still, the AI overlords have not yet fully taken over the planet. So it's still human beings that are consuming most of what we are putting out in the world, whether we're a B2B or a B2C business. And the expectations that human beings are having of companies that are putting widgets and computer applications and physical products and everything else in front of us, our expectations, the pace of the change of our expectations is changing so fast that even with companies that have been through some stuff, it is not like this is not like anything else they've been through. So how do they take what they are, what has sort of seen them through all those years, keep what's good, and then figure out how to pivot into some new ways of working, right? And new competencies and new skill sets that are going to equip them for this next age of success. And that's really what, like, when we come in, that's what we really talk about. And so one of the things we are one of our main frameworks is project to product transformation. So we really focus on project, taking people out of a more project management, more like manufacturing. First somebody take something, a piece of paper on their desk and they do their thing and then they walk it across the room to somebody else and then that person stamps it and then they walk it across the room and somebody else stamps it. That's a very, so that's a pretty antiquated way of doing things, and especially in a digital age, right? Whereas in a product management standpoint, it really does it means that we're focusing teams, we're thinking about putting teams around experiences and managing experiences as products and things like that. And that breaks a whole lot of stuff inside of a company, right? That requires different skill sets. It requires leaders to show up differently. It requires finance to fund things totally differently. So, really, when we start getting inside of companies, we say, okay, listen, what's really great is like you have a super passion, and commitment to your customer base, and like you are all about driving customer loyalty. Don't lose that stuff. That stuff's really important. How you show up with those things and how you want to deliver those things, that's what has to change. And so when we talk about business model, we're like, we don't want you to change your, we don't want you to change your business model necessarily. You may have to change your business model in this world. That's fine. What we want to talk about is how you work, and how you work is as important as what you deliver. And I think that's really new for a lot of companies. I think, back in the day when it was sort of, probably my dad, your dad, maybe my grandpa, everyone just showed up. They like sat at their desk and they did their job and they left, and it was no big deal. And nobody really gave a lot of thought to how anyone worked, because you just did your job and that was fine. Things are really complex now, and that's not sort of how things work anymore. So we got to think about things differently. And that's the stuff that gets me excited. I know you can tell that because I'm waving my hands around a lot, but whatever. So
No,
off my soapbox.
no, not scoot over. Let's both stand on this because, I grew up in Detroit, so manufacturing, industrial age, all of that good stuff. And I say this a lot, and I always premise this. It's like, okay, I'm from Detroit, and what I'm about to say might be considered blasphemy, but we need to say goodbye to Henry Ford and the way
Yes.
that we worked because the industrial age assembly line, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But the way that people worked in an office setting was very similar. But it was, using an analogy of a car. And if anybody remembers the Pontiac Fiero, because my dad and grandfather and great grandfather all worked for Generous Motors. That's what we called them back then. And now,
Yes.
but I was fortunate that, dad and a bunch of parents were able to bring their kids they had when they were making the Pontiac Fiero. We went to the plant and we actually saw a Pontiac Fiero be built from nothing to rolling off the assembly line kind of thing. And a great analogy here is the paint people that painted the vehicles, they weren't on the assembly line bolting in and screwing in the doors and fastening in this the stereo and the steering wheel and the seats and all that. He or she wasn't there. He was in
Yeah.
another enclosed room painting. So a good silo analogy there.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when you have that, unless you have somebody forward thinking and looking at all the way things flow to look at efficiencies, what could we do to make this a little bit more efficient? How could we improve the turnaround time? What could we do maybe if we got a bigger nozzle, for example, on the paint that wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
spray paint everywhere, but could paint a door by reducing, the time it
Mm-hmm.
takes to paint that door by, I don't know, 20%. Well, you add that up, that adds up. That
Mm-hmm.
shortens the time. But so often, and again, we'll pick on Generous Motors for a minute. They have not always been good at that. And
Yeah.
they kind of, well, we're number one. And then Toyota came and stole their lunch
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and they've never caught up. And
Yeah.
it's because they weren't they weren't doing any innovation. They are now. I would say
Yes.
that Mary Barra and the
Yes.
team there, they are. But then I think
Yes.
of a company that's in your backyard. It has a number three in it and it has the first
Yes.
initial of my first name. So you guys can put the math together. If 3M wants to sponsor us, they can. But I look at that organization and I don't know every in and out about them, but just understanding, how long they've been around and the innovation to all the things that they make and just different things. They're it's you hear the phrase 3M innovation. It's like, well, it's because that's their operating model. They
Yep.
innovate, and that not only with products, whether it's a post-it note or the acne patches that I wish I
Mhm.
had in the 80s. But those types of things, on top of everything else that they do, that comes from creating an environment where that is allowed and
Yes.
encouraged. And
Yeah.
too many organizations, again, going back to the assembly line, are siloed going, oh, we don't innovate here. We don't do that here.
Right.
And
Yeah.
those are the companies that might end up being in that 52%.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned, 3M. There's a story that I like to tell. I mean, the 3M story, right, is well known. The fact that they literally build in an innovation into people's jobs, right? Like that's how the post-it note came to be, was that there's like playtime, it's not what they call it, right, but built into people's jobs, which is that there's some portion of your expectation is that you're going to experiment on the company dime, right? Like that you're going to experiment, and that's part of their operating model, and that's a really, really good example. I think another way to sort of come at this and think about this, and this is one of my favorite examples, um, is NASA, right? So think about, think about what must go into building a spaceship, right? But especially just like the sheer like size of these, the Saturn V rocket and everything else, right? Of like what it must take, and the ingenuity of getting people into space and getting them back down and all of that kind of stuff. But when we talk about like product teams, right? One of the things people are like, well, I don't understand what a product team means when you're talking about like trying to build products. Usually are people are like, well, product is like, these are my little, my headphones or my iPhone or my pen or my lipstick. Those are products. Sure, those are all products, but so is the Zoom product that you and I are talking on right now, or when you go out to Google and you type in, you know, what is what what is whatever that you want to that your kids are talking about that you don't understand whatever language they're using or whatever, that's a product, right? All of those things that we're using, those digital experiences, those are all products as well, and they're being managed as products every bit as much as the phone or the earbuds or the car that we're talking about, right? So when we think about product teams and we think about teams that are trying to solve, thorny problems, the example that I always come back to is um, a scene in Apollo 13, right? So I'm a big movie buff. So there's this scene in Apollo 13 where um, the head NASA engineer comes in and he says, "We have got to make this," and he holds up like an air filter that has like a round plug on it, fit into this, which is like another air filter input that has a square box on it or whatever, using nothing but the stuff that's in this box, and he dumps this box over on it, right? And there's this whole big group of engineers, and it's cross-functional. You've got mathy engineers and you've got physical engineers and you've got all the different people with all the different expertise, and they all sit there and they look at it and they kind of do this, push their little nerdy glasses up their nose, and they all kind of go, okay, well, all right, and they kind of start you know fumbling through it and looking at it, and they start working on it, and eventually they figure out a way to like use some duct tape and dental floss, and they make it fit together. That kind of constraint based thinking where they're like, okay, problem solving, and we know we can do this, but it's a cross functional team of people that are working on a problem, a specific problem on how to fit X into Y. Like that is the classic kind of description of a product team, right? And that team comes together day after day after day to just solve problems over and over and over and over again. But that's not how most organizations are built, right? You take all the mathy nerds and you put the mathy nerds over together in one department. And you take all the structural nerds and you put them over in a different department. And you take all the, whatever else nerds and you put them over there. And you don't let them talk to each other. Why would you do that? They're different kinds of nerds. You, we don't want to mix our nerds up, right? Like, that was crazy. But think about the fact that if you did that, those Apollo 13 nerds would never, or well, the Apollo 13 astronauts would never make it back to Earth. It only happened when you got brought everyone together to have their own unique sphere of genius represented, but working together. And that's the part that gets, I think, breaks people's brains because they're like, well, we're not organized that way. We have these pillars, we have these organizations, our P&Ls are built these very specific ways. And you're coming in, Jen, and you're telling us that we, instead of working in these vertical silos, you're telling us that we have to break those silos and start to work horizontally. I'm like, yep, that's exactly what I'm telling you, you know?
Yeah, you let the accounting people into the marketing department. Now,
Yes.
you tell the accounting people, quit complaining about them spending money because if they don't market the business, there's no business for you to count anything. So, and me
Why don't
being,
you guys come together and figure out how to spend the right money on the right things, you
yeah,
know? Yeah.
yeah, it's critical. And my original career was public accounting, and my I don't have regrets in life, but I do wish that I would have spent a little bit more time in the marketing side of things at
Hmm.
college because it would have shortened my learning curve once I launched
Hmm.
a business and branding and everything else. I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, how does this work? Once I got past the, okay, you're spending money on this, it's like, yeah, but if you don't market, nobody knows you exist. So
Hmm.
they're not going to just be walking on the sidewalk and go, oh, what's that? And that's not
Right.
going to happen, especially
Right.
in this world where there are a bazillion social media posts and websites and everything else. It's like, how do you stand out? Well, as an organization, if you've got your operating model and system working really well and evolving as it goes. It's not like this box. It's kind of like when you see those things like in space or because you mentioned Apollo 13, things that
Yeah.
just kind of move around. Do they have a shape? Sort of. Well, that an organization that's like that,
Has
guess
to
what?
evolve.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they're in the 48% that are still here.
Yeah.
And
Right.
well, as long as they don't lose that, they have a good fighting chance that they will continue to be here no matter what in the world we get thrown with, whether it's a pandemic or inflation or global wars or tariffs or you name it. Everybody goes, okay, those are all, that's noise. Okay, that's external things. Yeah, there are things that impact us. Okay, how do we innovate around this or through this? What can we do to withstand these choppy waters? Because if you run a business, spoiler alert, you're going to face some choppy waters. Because if you don't, well, number one, write a book on how you're avoiding them, because I think we'd
Right.
all love to read that. Now,
Sign up.
yeah, yeah, subscribe. Yeah, I'm going to follow you on all your Instagram and social media accounts. I want to see how in the world you've navigated that because it's like a unicorn. It's like, okay, yeah. Other than the dog toy that my dog has with the unicorn, which is like 3 times his size, but he still attacks it. So it's like, good for you, buddy. You attacked that unicorn. But ultimately, it boils down to
Mhm.
organizations just, understanding who they are, and that
Mhm.
not just as, okay, we make this and no, 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 no. Who are you? And
Mhm.
that is your collective of experiences and people and ideas and concepts. And I took over a healthcare organization. This was back in, oh my goodness, it's 11 years now. Yikes. My dad told me a long time ago, as soon as you get your driver's license, things go fast. And he wasn't referring to the car, he was referring to life.
I'm
I'm like,
yes.
11 years, my goodness. I'm gonna need to speak to my therapist about that. That's depressing. But anyway, but this organization was, they put the capital D in dysfunctional. They were just horrible, lots of turnover and no trust between the physicians and clinicians, and it was just a bad, bad mess. So I'm like, yeah, I want to go take that company over, and I cleaned it up after about a year and didn't, using a Jack Welch term, de-hire a bunch of people. I was able to earn the trust of the everybody along the way. And people say, well,
Mhm.
how in the world did you do that? I said, crazy thing. I talked to them and I listened.
Oh my gosh.
It's a
We
weird
say that to
concept.
people all the time.
Yeah.
That's one of our taglines. In fact, I swear to you, we're thinking about merch. that is like a mug that says, "Have you tried talking to the person?" Because how many things like times where people will come to you, especially when you're the boss in a situation like that, Michael, where people come and they're like, well, they don't do this and they don't do that, and I need this, and they're not doing their job, blah, blah, blah. And my consultants and I, like, literally the first question we always have for people is, well, did you try talking to them? Like, it's not even like exceptionally good advice, like novel. It's great advice, talk to the person, but it's not novel advice. Like, literally, have you tried talking to the person? Well, no. Okay, tell you what, you go talk to the person, have like a legitimately like calm conversation, see if that resolves it. If it doesn't, then come back to me and then we'll talk. 9 times out of 10, just talking to people, just like having a normal conversation, non-confrontational, normal conversation, like, solves a lot of problems, right?
Yeah, it's communicate. Well, who was it? I'm not the first person to say this, and I've seen it many times. It's like, most of the world's problems would be solved by actually communicating
Right.
and listening and seeking to
Yeah.
understand,
Speak to
not,
understand. Yes.
yeah, not to respond. And
Mhm.
you'd be surprised once you get that to be part of the DNA. It alleviates so many issues. I mean, it doesn't mean there isn't issues. There's always going to be conflict just because humanity gets bored and we need some conflict. All right, let's throw it in there just to
Sure.
mix things up. It's like, yeah, it's like maybe not so much salt next time. Let's scale that back a little bit. But again, it's going back to what we talked about. It's when an organization understands who they are and
Mhm.
their systems and operating systems and the strength of their people and the desires, channeling into what people would be interested in instead of,
Mhm.
yes, I work in product development on this and this. Okay, that's awesome. What do you have an interest in? Is it that
Mhm.
or is there
Right.
something else? And quite frankly, to kind of, I don't want to praise Beth per se, the fictional character Beth,
Yes. The fictional Beth.
but
Back to fictional Beth. Yes.
but because Beth has done a lot of different things, part of that, on the other side of the coin is, okay, they're well-rounded. So I can see why people would say, well, she worked in all these departments, but that doesn't mean necessarily Beth understood all of it. There may have been some
Sure.
work that she despised, and there's might be
Sure.
some things that she loves, and if given the opportunity, she would probably say, you know what, I'm considering taking the pay cut and I'd love to go do that again because I just, it lit
Yeah.
my days up. And I
Yeah.
think that's where, again, you understand where your people are, what they like, how they can become better, what are their interests, invest in them so they can really shine. And what happens when you do that, your retention goes way up. Your productivity goes also way up. You don't have as much drama in your workplace. And again, this
Mhm.
is, we talk about artificial intelligence or AI all the time, and I think
Mhm.
back to the tech writer John Dvorak, and he said this on a show that I used to watch quarter century ago, and they were talking
Mhm.
about AI back then, artificial
Mhm.
intelligence, and he's like, I'm not doing anything with artificial intelligence until we can master artificial common sense.
Mhm.
And, and And that's stuck with me for a quarter century. And I should probably find him on social media and just thank him for that comment, just
Yeah.
as a shit, because it stuck with me. And I laughed. I'm like, he's not wrong.
He's
And,
not wrong. He's not
and
wrong. No.
so
I will
it's,
tell you, something struck me while you were talking, where you were just saying that um about what employee how employees react to having well-defined operating models, or having sort of a sense of an understanding of how things get done in their organization. That is one of the things we find when we work with clients, and as clarity is driven, right, as companies really do articulate sort of expectations, um, clarity on how decisions get made, and then, by the way, not just clarity on how decisions get made, but then a commitment to actually making decisions that way, because those are two different things sometimes, right? Um, and that follow through and things like that, is that employees start showing up differently. And that commitment from leaders and commitment from employees starts to do things like show up in engagement surveys and and employee engagement and employee satisfaction, and it starts turning showing up in decreased turnover and people employee commitment to their jobs, and just people feeling better about their jobs and people like being excited about their jobs, because that is like the other side of Beth being there for 25 years might be that Beth loved her job. Beth loved all of her jobs, and maybe you don't have one Beth, maybe you have 25 Beths who literally have been here for a long time, and the history is like hard coded in their DNA because you have a high degree of job satisfaction. But like you what you want to do is you want to spread that around, and you can't have that if the only way that you can know how to get things done is if you work here for 25 years. You got to have a way to shortcut that, right? You got to spread that knowledge around. And so by being really intentional and clear and transparent about how decisions get made and how work gets prioritized and how teams are, forming teams around really, um, you know prioritizing work and then forming teams around that, and like having that transparency and clarity, is that what you start to do is you start to create that buy-in and empowerment across the organization, and that's when you start to see the dividends pay off in that employee satisfaction. So like this isn't just about like, oh hey, you should have a good operating model because it's good for the bottom line. I mean, it is good for the bottom line. It's also good for employee satisfaction. It's also good for customer experience. It's also good for like there's no real like downside to this. The one thing I will tell you though is it's not easy to do. If it was easy to do, everyone would have done it already. Mostly this is the stuff everybody ignores for a really long time. And then says, hey, why doesn't why we keep throwing money at technology, right? We keep sinking money in technology. We keep buying new platforms and things like that, but nothing ever really gets done. We sort of get to like 75% of the way there, and then everything kind of trails off and never really gets across the finish line. Or, there's sort of these symptoms of, we've got all these silos and nobody quite talks to each other. Like that's the sign that like you've been ignoring it for too long, right? You kind of have gotten to this point where, yeah, okay, you've been shoving all this stuff in the back of your closet. It's time to open up the closet, empty everything out. Let's get it organized. It's going to be painful, but it'll be good in the long run.
Yeah, it's streamlining and simplifying, and get down to the basics, and the emptying the closet or the junk drawer and just
Yeah,
putting things back in, because there are things that you've been carrying for a long time that
might not be
isn't.
serving you.
No, it may be actually hindering you depending
Yes.
on what it is. So once you get clear on that, it's a great step to, do this. And this is, as much as we would love to say this, it's not a set and forget. This is an
No,
ongoing,
it is.
this is like oxygen, it just
Yeah,
flows, and there's going to be times that are going to be amazing. There's going to be times that are going to be growth opportunities, as we like to
that's
call
right.
it.
That's right.
But ultimately, if your organization gets to the stage where you really want to, learn more about this and really get in tune with your operating model, then Jen and her team is the way to get hold of them. So I've
Thank
loved
you.
this. Oh, you're welcome. I'm a big time advocate for the work you're doing. So that's why
Thank you.
I was so happy to finally get you on the show, because I want to get this out right away. So why don't you share where, and again, loved
Mhm.
our conversation. Could talk about this for hours and hours.
Sure.
But where can people find you and all this amazing work you're doing?
Awesome. Well, we'll have both of these on the show page, but LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me personally, Jen Swanson on LinkedIn. And then for the company, we are Tuckpoint Advisory Group, and we are at tuckpoint.com. And everyone always asks me about Tuckpoint, and it's like tuck, tuck someone in, and point, like you point at them. So one word, tuckpoint.com. We're very easy to find that way. So, but we'll make sure you have both of those links for the show page.
Yes, it's tuck in and go to sleep,
Tuck in
but
and
not,
go to sleep, point at
yeah,
them. That's
yeah,
right.
that's whether it's for kids or dogs or
Right.
maybe ourself,
Right.
put down the eye binky and go to sleep, Mike. It's like, yeah, so yeah, no, thank you for this. I'll definitely have all that information in the show notes. So keep being awesome, Jen. Thank you so much for being on the show.
You're so welcome. Thanks so much, Michael.